Hello, class, and welcome back to covering the third topic of the semester as we start diving into worldviews, to belief systems, to religion. Let me go into our PowerPoint. All right, so we're going to do overview in the videos you have seen. We touched on terminology. And then you also had a very interesting video on the Mayas of Guatemala and a belief system in action, a practice of dance, and we'll get into that in a bit. So in anthropology, we are looking at different worldviews, at different belief systems. And this is how humans tap into the supernatural world, how they communicate. And the way they do this is where we can find the collection of ideas, of belief systems, and also see how these ideas are transferred, how they continue, how they survive, or how they've changed throughout time with different influences. So in anthropology, we are more interested in understanding the elements of how humans define the world around them. And this is rooted in the concept of ontology. What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of being? So when we're looking at worldviews, this is how humans defined basically the world around them. And in contrast to theology and fields such as theology, where scholars are looking into the origins, to the essence of God and its creator, anthropologists are interested in understanding the development, the function, and the impact that these belief systems have on humans. What are the social meanings? What are the practices? How are they carried out? So remember when we started in theory, when we talked about the father of anthropology, Taylor, this is how originally this field started. And while he was the first to start looking at different belief systems, categorizing belief systems in a hierarchical manner, from traditional belief systems to organized religion to a scientific worldview, we know now that this type of structure, categorizing humans and marking their evolution based on their belief system, is discredited. So again, in anthropology, we do not see belief systems, religious practices in a hierarchy. Whether we're looking at animism, where people see that nature is alive, that it possesses spirit, to polytheism, where the belief that there are many beings, many supernatural beings in charge of assisting the world and humans, to monotheism, the belief in one God, one creator that created everything in existence. So in anthropology, we do not categorize them in a hierarchy, because from a scientific point of view, none of these could be scientifically proven. So one is not more logical than another. But in anthropology, what we try to do is to dive in to understand these belief systems, understand how humans are viewing the world around them and their place in it. And one of the ways to tap into this is to look into their practices, their belief systems. And I'll get into the characteristics that we find across the board. So when we are looking at this There is a difference between religion and spirituality. And in general, just to keep it simple, when we talk about religion, we're looking at more of a social institution, something that is organized, something that has been put in place with certain guides and leaders. There is a structure, and many times there is a hierarchy in this organization of who is the leader and preparations to become such the spiritual guide. So there's a social institution, an organization involved, while spirituality is more of a personal experience. All right. So we're going to be diving into a combination of all of these different belief systems. And I want you to try to understand this rather than to memorize these terms. I want you to really have it sink in. So when we are looking at some of the examples that I will be presenting, they may be very, very different from things that you have ever seen or heard of. And in no way or shape is this intended to change your belief system. But I want you to be open to try to understand it, to try to find the commonalities that we find across the board in human behavior, in the way we find elements that we find in belief systems that we could pretty much look at across the board. While each one is very distinct, we have found that all belief systems have 5 characteristics. So no matter if you're looking at something very foreign than your own, if you're trying to understand it and trying to research it, these are the 5 things to identify. The first one, and they go in no hierarchical order, okay? But all belief systems have a sacred story. As we had mentioned, Joseph Campbell talks about myths. But myths not in the sense that myths that's not something that's not true. No, myths as a form of the story of origins. Rather, whether it's we have a sacred text, that is provided, that tells a story, or we have oral tradition. If to find out, you want to try to understand this belief system. You want to try to dive into the sacred story. And these stories, they provide the codes of life. They provide the stories about the origins of life, the origins of nature. What is our purpose as humans on this planet? How are we created? How is the universe created? What happens after we die? Where is there something beyond this world? Whether it be ideas of reincarnation or ideas of going to a spiritual realm, or above or below. Are we going to the heavens? Are we going to the underworld? And what all these mean? So we find this information in the sacred stories, in their cosmology, ideas of cosmology. We also find the use of symbols. So looking at the symbols that are used in this belief system and try to decipher their meaning and their application. And because you might find, certain symbols, you might find similarities, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing when they're being applied. The other thing is looking, all of these belief systems either have a supernatural being as one supernatural force, energy, creator, um, or many beings that are in charge of many aspects of life, from nature to humans, that give a force and guidance to our existence. And the other thing is the use of rituals. We find in every belief system there are practices on how this belief system is carried out. And this we find in rituals. Rituals are the belief system in action. So when you're looking at a ceremony, when you're looking at a practice, at offerings, at blessings, at prayers, at certain things that must be done, this is where you find the belief system being applied. And lastly, you also find you want to be able to identify the religious specialist. Who are the experts? Who are the practitioners? Who are the guides of this community that provide this information, either from a text, a written form, or oral tradition? Who are the ones that know the sacred story, that apply symbols in their rituals, that talk about these supernatural entities that created life or that govern life, and so forth. And the religious specialist can be pretty much divided in two parts, from full-time religious specialist. And, they're kind of given, they have official titles. And these full-time religious specialists, you'll usually find them in organized religion. So there's already a structure put in place, a preparation, an education that must be achieved in order to achieve this title as leaders of this belief system. So we find priests or priestesses, other official titles. In Catholicism, we find priest or ministers or pastors. In Judaism, the teachers are referred as rabbis. In Islam, the spiritual leaders that lead the prayer are called imam. And in Buddhism, the Lama is a title that represents the spiritual leader and that has reincarnated. And so today we have the Dalai Lama. And we can go on and on and on through several organized religions, but this gives you an idea. These are full-time specialists, and there is a structure in place, organization. And this other religious specialist, and these are more grassroots, these are more local. They are rooted more in indigenous traditional practices, and many times they are part-time specialists. They're referred to as shamans. Now, the word shaman is a term we're using very loosely. It is a borrowed term from Siberia, inspired from understanding Siberian traditional practices from pastoral communities. And they were, they were the spiritual leaders that would go into different states, altered states of consciousness, do chants, dances, vision quest, and so forth. So from this term, we use it very loosely and now referred to as shamans for the sake of this. But every every culture, every community has its own terminology to refer to this specialist. So if you're interested in diving into this, I share this with you to not arrive, so you don't arrive to any community and just ask, who's a shaman of this community? Excuse me. All right, where was I? Okay, so again, referring back to shamans, this is a term that has been borrowed, and every culture has a specific names. In the case of the Mayas of Yucatan, they refer to them as Ahmen, and this was in ancient Mayan culture. There was an organization, there was a hierarchy, there were different titles. There were different titles of Mayan priest within the community, within the rulers. The rulers were priests themselves. It was a theocracy. But today, the only surviving Mayan priests are the agrarian priests, and they are referred to as the Ahmen. Now, a very distinct thing about any of these religious practitioners is that they must be recognized by the community that they work in. So, in anthropology, we dive in to try to understand, as we had explained, both the emic and the etic. The inside view, the emic, and also the etic, the outside view. The outside view would be looking at what function does this belief system serve? Because both, whether it be an organized religion or a personal experience of spirituality, we find that they serve from a social, psychological, and emotional function. How they serve on a social level for society. One of the things is that they maintain this unity. You are part of this belief system. You are part of this community. The other thing is that in these rituals and ceremonies that are carried out, this is one way where people, by participating in this, they feel part of the community. They are participating in this, and they are carrying out and applying their beliefs here. So, by also passing on and learning the sacred stories, the myths, and again, myths as referred to as sacred stories, not as something that is fake. Myths, as Joseph Campbell refers to them, these origin stories provide the codes, the moral codes for behavior. How are we supposed to behave? How are we supposed to treat each other? What are the functions in our society? In many cases, from these sacred stories comes it also influences even our gender roles. What role are we to play? What role are we to carry out in the societies? What is the acceptable behavior, and so forth. So another function that this serves is to provide, it reduces anxieties of the unknown. You find comfort, security in knowing that there is a supernatural realm or energy or force that is within us or among us, that is guiding, assisting life on earth, humans on earth. And from these, by understanding this belief system, by understanding the sacred stories and who is the guide of this supernatural energy, we also get our, like I mentioned, the ethical codes of what is correct and what is not correct. And if you break these codes, you commit a taboo, there are consequences that may come about. Now, the word taboo is another term that is borrowed and used loosely in our field. Okay, so not everybody uses this term taboo. It's actually a Polynesian term that is borrowed from tapu, which refers to a supernatural power that must be avoided. And so there are things that must be avoided, certain foods, certain places. They're associated with either bringing a negative energy. They're associated with something that could bring sickness, and that represents something dirty and so forth, could bring about illness. And by committing a taboo, there are supernatural punishments, misfortune, something that can come about for this person or the community that has committed this, the breaking of these moral codes, these ethical codes that are put in place to guide the community of believers. And the other function that we find is this rooted in the reduction of anxieties by knowing that there is, a guide, an energy guiding people. It also relieves humans from certain burdens or responsibilities. In many cases, whether they're positive things or negative things that take place, it is sort of like lifting a weight off human shoulders to say, there's a reason behind this that we may not understand or know, because this supernatural force or forces are in charge. In Spanish, we say, in Catholicism in Spanish, we say, si Dios quiere, God willing. And in this case, it is saying, this is the will of God that this took place. It is out of our hands. It is out of our control. And to give this, to give this burden up, to give this responsibility up of control to a higher force is also relieving humans of burdens. In other cases, we will look at examples where petitions are given to nature spirits or to the ancestors. And it is the ancestors' will or the nature spirits' will that this happen, or things were not done correctly. And therefore, these consequences came about. Okay? So again, across the board, when you're looking at a belief system, you'll be able to find those 5 characteristics that we discussed, and you'll be able to find the function that these belief systems serves, that these worldviews, it inspires, it guides, it shapes the way humans view the world around them and their place in it. So we'll do a quick review of these terminologies before I dive into animism. In animism, a review, this is looking at nature and objects as animated, as alive. They have an energy, they have a spirit in many cases. And I'm going to give various examples of this in the next slide. Polytheism, we find that this is actually the most common practice across the world. And so animism is one of the oldest, and polytheism is one of the most common practices that we find, in particular among indigenous communities. So in this case, we find a list of energies, of forces, of gods, goddesses assigned to human affairs. It could be from nature spirits to, guides of forces, of energy, of emotions. Among the Mayas, and again, I do refer to the Mayas quite a bit. As I had mentioned, this is my specialization, working with the Yucateca Mayans of today. We find that they continue, despite the predominant religion being practiced in the region is Catholicism, which is a monotheistic religion. We still find within the agrarian communities that they carry out a very ancient ritual. It has changed, of course, throughout, and it has adapted, but nonetheless, it's still an offering, a ceremony, calling upon the rain god, Chak. And some scholars argue, is Chak a god, or does it represent the nature spirit? Nonetheless, Chak controls the rain, and it is the bringer of rain. And among agrarian societies in the Yucatan, they do not have irrigation, as we do here in our farm communities. The topography is it's like a limestone, very rocky topography, very difficult to carry out. And so the Mayas have been agrarian communities since the rise of their civilization, by being able to domesticate certain grains as corn, as this was a wild grain that they were able to domesticate and grow along with other grains such as beans and calabazas and so forth. Corn in particular, these are still continue to be the main subsistence crops for today's agrarian communities. And this practice of calling upon the rain god and making offerings has been essence to their continuity and their survival. Because, again, as I mentioned, they do not have the modern technology that we use here in our agrarian in our farming communities, irrigation and other chemicals that are used. The Mayas rely on they need a particular amount of rain for the crop to survive. Too little rain will cause drought and it will not grow. Too much rain will flood out the crop, and again, will kill off the crop. So here we find that in many indigenous communities, we find what we call the use of syncretism. Syncretism is where communities, cultures have blended systems of belief or traditions They've adopted and made it their own. And we find this in many parts of the world, even where monotheism, the belief in a single God, of a creator, of a creator energy, a creator being that created everything, that made creation. Even in these dominant religious worldviews, we still find elements of animism and polytheism. And even in our modern society, even in today's technological society, we still find elements of this. Let me dive into animism to make this point. So in animism, again, here is where practitioners of this belief, they see things as carrying an energy, carrying an essence. It could be a spirit, it could be a soul, it could have force. It could be from sacred landscapes to sacred places where the leaders of this belief system originated from. So these are places where people must do pilgrimages once in their lifetime. To reach these places requires sacrifice and devotion and preparation. Or they could also be man-made objects that hold force, that hold the blessing, that hold this kind of protection, or that could hold energy to harness good or bad. So, as I had mentioned before, animism is the oldest form of belief system that we have been able to identify. And this is from archaeological facts, from paintings, from artifacts and things that have been left behind. And when we're looking at objects, animate, inanimate objects that are not alive, but these certain objects can hold a force, can hold a strength or protection or power. These are what in anthropology we refer as a fetish. And fetish, again, is objects that possess power. And this power is also referred to as mana. Mana, M-A-N-A. And we've heard of it as, this has a spiritual force, or it has mojo. It could be something described as almost electricity, strength, energy, etc. So think about objects in our everyday life. Something that perhaps you hold dear, and that you find that holds this energy. It could be something spiritual. It could be something material. Think about, I give some examples here from amulets or a cross or certain stones that could bring about a balance and energy of protection. But also think about how we look at certain objects that are very important to us, that we can almost see as having a spirit. Think about cars. How many of you, in one point or another, have talked to your car? Or, for those that really invest a lot in their car, or to have, feel this empowerment when driving a certain car. Think about that energy, that force that is felt. It's like if the car is alive in a sense, right? In other cases, we might have a certain attachment to our phones, because of the communication and the energy and the information they possess. But it's very much holds this energy. And by understanding how even in a technological advanced community, we see things as animated. Think about how we see our pets. We see them, as part of the family, as we almost anthropomorphize them, give them a human characteristics, are able to communicate with them in such a way. So look at this. So you can, I try to bring these examples out so we don't see, so you can try to understand the following examples. Try to almost relate to the logic or how people view certain things. Because when we talk about totems, and I'll define totems in a second, but they hold the essence of ancestors, and there might be figures or objects, but they possess this spirit in this case, rather than an energy. And in many times, certain objects can be charged with energy, can be charged with this protection, or charged to carry out a certain intention. And how by charging it with mana, this force, mana can be increased by rituals, by ceremonies. See, this is a form of charging these objects. And another very distinct form of animism is that this relationship with these with either nature, animals, or objects, this matter can have agency. And when we refer to as something it has agency, we're basically saying it has willpower. So this has the willpower to protect me. This has the willpower to inspire me, to give me strength. In other cases, like I said, sometimes items are used to carry out ill will. And we'll see some examples of that later on. So I wanted to present these terms because in some of the films that we'll see, in some cases they refer to as these are fetish. And that's basically saying these are objects with power. And sometimes these objects with power can be charged, can be given mana, can be given a force. Think about things that are taken to sacred places to receive a blessing, or when someone undergoes a rites of passage, they receive a gift, and this gift represents. It also gives, it represents an achievement. It represents strength, and so there are many things also that we seek out that hold and harness, this energy. Think about also, think about items that belong to a very famous person, and that you're able to possess it. These items, whether they're collectibles, antiques, relics, etc. By having these items, let's say it's a guitar player, a guitar from a famous guitar player. So let's say it almost say such and such, let's say Jimi Hendrix or something, they played this guitar. They held this guitar in their hand, and therefore by having it, you almost embody the essence of that, that famous person. And in a sense, when we get into the last part of the semester, when we talk about consumerism, I want you to remember animism, because in many cases, when you pay attention to the commercials or to the advertisement of items that are being used, of items that are being sold, they are presenting not only, I'm having this item, having this purse, having this object gives you power. It almost gives you a status. It gives you almost it gives you happiness. But it's the item itself. You must possess it in order to have it. Okay, and we'll get into this later on. But I want to relate many of the things that we do in everyday life to this animistic worldview. Okay. Let's look at some of the rituals. One of the rituals that are very common in animism is calling upon the animal spirit. In the film that you saw in Gods and Kings, in the beginning it explained how the Mayas, these are contemporary Mayas of Guatemala, carrying out these traditions, these dance, and this creating masks and costumes and so forth during this period. But it talked a little bit about the ancient Mayas, how they would carry out dances for days in order to enter a state of trance and call upon the animal spirit. The animal spirit that they would embody would help them in war and protection and warriors and the ball game, and things that needed to have, superhuman feat. And then it talked about how in today's contemporary Maya, how those that are still carrying out a long tradition of this performance, of this dance, how they have to go through this preparation, a very long preparation, usually 6 months or more, how they make offerings in these places that belong to the ancestors, how they make offerings even in these environments where the ritual perhaps has changed, and they may be using jokes and so forth, but nonetheless they're still making offerings, calling upon the animal spirit to invoke them. And by possessing this power, they are able to carry out these superhuman feats, as the anthropologists described, the risk that they are taking in twirling around this rope and such a high altitude with nothing on the bottom, no safety net, security, or even the fact that they were able to bring up this high, huge wooden pole that was brought down from the trees of the ancestors. Just how everything is set up, it's a very risky environment. It's a very risky undertaking, and yet they have done it for tradition, for generations, and they anthropologists have been able to identify its origins and understand all the changes that have taken place. But nonetheless, they were calling upon the animal spirit to carry this out, of the deer and the monkey, right? I'm sorry, not the deer and the monkey and the jaguar or tiger, I believe. In many cases, petitions are made to animal spirits before going hunting. The Inuits of Baffin Islands, they do seal hunting, and before they go out to also a very delicate environment, risky environment of the ice, they also ask for permission to hunt these seals, to not offend their animal spirits. They're asking for permission, and they also give thanksgiving. They give thanks for the successful hunt. Among the Yucateca Mayas, I witnessed petitions and offerings made before going deer hunting in the forest. And these petitions and offerings are made because when you enter nature, nature is charged with energy. Nature is charged with the ancient spirits. And nature has spirits that protect it. And therefore, if you're entering a territory that is not, that is not yours, that is not your private piece of land that you have protection on, when you're entering this territory, you can be charged with a certain energy, what they call mal viento, ill wind, that can make someone sick, make them very ill to the point of dying. And this is because nature has not given them permission to carry out this hunt. So today, many agrarian societies make offerings before entering this hunt. And in Chiapas, Mexico, among other Mayas, they have this. They carry out this belief system that every human has. Their soul is split in two. You have a dual soul. Part of your soul is in an animal, and you could call upon this guardian. You can call upon the animal for, as we saw in Guatemala, to embody this energy. But also, if you do not ask for permission, in a hunt, you could risk killing part of your soul. So in being able to carry out these rituals, it is a way to also safeguard one's soul. So there's a part called the chuel, which is indestructible. It is the essence that human possess, the spirit, the soul, and the other part is also called the wai. And this is the energy that resides in the animal spirit. And we saw an example of this as well in the very first films, where we were talking about the immigrants that had come to the U.S. and they were carrying out these offerings, calling upon the spirit to return. And they made an offering to the cow, asking for permission, and then sacrificing the cow and placing the cow's head in front of the door in exchange for the health of the child, if you remember that at the beginning of the semester. So, as I mentioned, another example of calling upon the animal spirit was an example that we saw at the beginning of the course, when we were looking at why is culture important, and taking into account other people's concept of healing, and how this has been integrated in our medical system to take it into account. We saw an example of animistic worldviews, of calling upon the animal spirit in exchange for the health of the child. And this was in the film In Between Two Worlds, among the Hmong people. And, we saw there how they made an offering to a cow and asked for an exchange for the child's health. And so this is one example of, having an animistic worldview, very similar to what the Mayans of Chiapas have. This idea that the human soul could reside in in another part outside the human body, in this case belonging to an animal, and therefore you must have permission. You must have permission to enter nature. You must have permission before going on a hunt, because you could risk hurting the other part of your soul. One example that we find in the Yucatan Peninsula is this idea of the alush. The alush, the best way I can describe them to bring to these ideas that we can relate to, we would call them either as leprechauns or gnomes. These are little creatures, little beings, magical beings that exist within nature. They are protective spirits, and we find archaeological evidence in many sites. This was taken in Uxmal, the pyramid of Uxmal in Yucatan, but we find them throughout the Mayan world, and not only in archaeological descriptions, but in today's communities among the Yucatan. It is very, very common to hear stories of the alush. If you ever travel to the Yucatan, you will find that businesses, hotels, many places use that name. These are the alushes, and refer to them. So this is a very popular local term that is used. But it's very interesting that we find them in Mayan sites. We find artifacts in museums that refer to the alush. And today they're very much alive in Mayan consciousness, in modern Mayan consciousness. This is an example of another, I believe this one I took in Belize. This is from, I'm not sure if Caracol or Yashuna, but this, again, we find here a depiction of a little person, a little spirit, a small miniature being. And the alush are considered to possess a spirit of an ancestor in today's Mayan consciousness. This picture right here, where it says aluxes, ALUXES, this is taken from the museum there in Yucatan. And these are very much the figurines that are found throughout this region. And, this region, starting from central Mexico to, all through Latin America, there are so many cities that remain to be discovered. And there's just not enough research and funds to do so. So it is very common that agrarian communities find them when they're out in the forest, when they're out hunting, when they're out doing their agriculture. They find these figurines. Not all of them are aluxes, but they refer to them as aluxes. And in many of my interviews with Mayan priests or priestesses, as we have here Doña Berta, they have an alush themselves, and they use them as assistants. And I have, so here we have Don Hermes, and this is a picture, and I have a video of where he introduced us to the alush, and I'm going to share that story with you. But here's a picture of Doña Berta's table or altar. This is her altar, where she has a combination. Here we see a combination of different symbols of syncretism. Doña Berta is a midwife, and she can also carry out certain healing rituals and properties and blessings for people. She does not, while she can do it, she doesn't carry out so much the agrarian rituals that are done, in people's agrarian plots, because of some of them can go up to 3 days that the Mayan priest has to be on site and constantly carrying out prayers and offerings and so forth. But nonetheless, I found it very interesting that they have their collection of figures that clay figures, figurines that they have found in their area, in their properties, or when they go into these into the forest, or in their agriculture plots. And many people are afraid of possessing these objects, these totems. And totems they're objects, but they possess the spirit of an ancestor or a nature spirit. And throughout, like I said, throughout the Yucatan, you will find stories of the Alush. Here's a newspaper clipping, a picture that I took, where this is also very common to find in the newspaper, reporters getting stories of people that are missing or that have gone missing, and they were taken by the Alush. And in many cases, they seek out a Mayan priest to carry out a divination and be able to identify or try to find where the person is. I remember there was this one case where an elderly man disappeared into the forest, and with the help of a Mayan priest, an Ahmed, he was able to direct the family or the police to a certain area where he envisioned that the man would be, and they found him. When they found the man, he talked about the story of how he followed these little beings, almost children-like, and that he followed them into a cave and was fed, and he just lost track of time. While nonetheless, for the community, he had been missing. And in other initiations that Mayan priests have had, they have been taken by the Alush into the spiritual realm, where they have been taught certain practices. For example, this plant will help heal this illness, or this is how you would carry out this offering. In the case, so here the translation of here, it says, elderly man disappeared in Pomuch. Pomuch is in Campeche. I added that. The Alushas took him. And so the family, when people disappear, they not only, of course, notify the authorities, but they also seek out the assistance of an Ahmed that is able to carry out a divination, to be able to identify perhaps where this person is. Because in many cases, the Alush they can be tricksters. They can also take people. They can also, in many cases, call upon children and disappear. As I had mentioned before, my family is from this region in Campeche. And I remember as a teenager, one of my cousins asking my father if he would take these figurines because they did not want them in their house. At one point, one of my nephews, as a baby, as a toddler, because he could already stand up on his crib, was standing up and was uh, it was kind of talking to something, and then they found that in the direction that he kept approaching and talking or trying to play with something, it was where they had these figurines, and so they had this belief that this could be a danger to the child, as alushes are known to be tricksters if they are not taken care of correctly. And they can, lure people in to disappear them. So I have a collection of stories that I gathered throughout the regions of how the Akhmen have been able to bring back people that the Alush have taken. But in the case of these Mayan priests, they take care of their Alush. They use them as assistants. And Don Hermes, as you see here in the blue shirt, this is his Alush, and he keeps him very guarded. This was a special occasion where we were invited to stay in his house, and because the Alush is a guardian, the Alush guards his property, and it guards him from. And not also does it assist him in rituals and offerings, but the Alush also assists him in protecting his property from intruders. So here, while we have some, the type of fencing are man-made, like stone walls, one stone on top of another. There really is not that much security. In other words, the entrance to the property, it could be easily entered, but these alushes are protectors of the area. And in this case, we were invited to stay with him, and he brought out the alush to introduce us. He introduced me by my full name. He introduced my husband by his full name, and he introduced us to the alush, letting him know that we were his guest, and that he is to accept us and also protect us. And my experience with the alush, while I had collected all of these stories throughout, and I was very familiar with them, it had not really sunk in the reality of how Mayans relate to this ancestor spirit and how it's animated and it functions. In our night, in one of the first nights that we spent with Don Hermes, I had been conducting field work in the area, and he invited us to spend the night and go to a local festival with him. And we gladly accepted. We were honored to have that opportunity. But I said, no problem. I will organize my field work to be close to this area, and then I will come over in the evening to go to the festival and spend the night. In my field work, I was seeking out interviews with Ahmed, and I'm in this neighboring community, and I'm asking, I'm trying what we call the snowball effect, gathering how many people recognize a person. And I ask, they refer to this person, well, you can go to him, but I wouldn't recommend it. But he knows, but I wouldn't recommend it. And I would ask another person, oh, well, there's this, they would mention the same man, but I wouldn't recommend it. Well, why is he not recommended? I would ask. And they say, well, he knows, but I just wouldn't recommend it. And therefore, my curiosity got the best of me. And I started thinking, well, what makes this person so different that he obviously knows, he's recognized by the community to have this knowledge, but people are not recognizing him. What makes him different, and that he's being ostracized? And so we arrived to his place. We introduced ourselves. I asked, if I can interview him, and he accepted. And in the interview process, before I had walked into his property, I had noticed a woman, and you see how Doña Berta has her flower dress on, and this is a huipil. So it's, it's usually like a white dress, very squared, and it's embroidered. So I saw a woman with a dress like this, but very thin, very, very thin, almost kind of, bony, where you could see just, her bones, and it was torn kind of off the shoulder, and it was dirty, and she was walking around, and I had just seen her from my side vision in in like in a yard. I didn't know this yard was connected to this man's house. So I had seen her there, but I didn't think of anything of it. And I walk in and I'm interviewing him, and we explain who we are, etc. I'm asking about. By this time, I'm very familiar with certain agrarian rituals, with certain traditions, and I'm elaborating on this. And I start paying attention to the symbolisms that he had in his space, because you don't walk into their house. There's usually a certain space dedicated to healing practices or to any practice like this. It's not associated with their household. And long story short, I'll get to the point. He explains that he is what we would call a sorcerer, what we would call a witch doctor. He devotes 100% of his practice to this. While he comes from a tradition of his mom did have knowledge of this practice. His mom would be considered what they call in the Yucatan a shapeshifter. She was able to shapeshift into an animal and be able to roam around the area, and therefore he had this knowledge, and he comes from this line of tradition, but he had chosen to go the dark route, we could say, to do ill will, people's ill will. And when he's explaining his practice and how he came to be, and it's pretty complex, and the initiation that he had to go through and so forth, I said, okay, it's not what I am looking for. I didn't tell him that. I said, all right, no problem. I start cutting my interview slowly, gently, when all of a sudden to my right, I see this person kind of walking back and forth, very zombie-like. Like I said, she's wearing a dress like Doña Berta, but it's torn, it's dirty. Her hair is in her face. She's pale, and she's just kind of walking, but very oddly, like back and forth, very almost, with difficulty walking. And she's staring at us, and by this time I'm feeling very uncomfortable. And so I cut my interview, and I'm saying my goodbyes, and we leave the property. I left very, uncomfortable, shaken by what I had seen, and my description to you is very limited. You wish I could convey it in other words, but the way I kind of describe it to my students is in that movie. I think it's called The Ring. Where it was just scary for me for again what I had not been used to seeing. And again, I'm not seeking out people that do ill will. I'm seeking out people that do agrarian rituals, healing rituals, and that are recognized by the community as such forth. So this is where I learned my number one rule, which I had explained, is they must be recognized by the community. The community had tried to warn me, but they didn't exactly tell me. And when I went back to Don Hermes' house and I explained my story to him, he said, yes, he's very well known as a sorcerer, or, what we would call a witch doctor. And that person is probably someone he is committing ill will to, and will suffer consequence, maybe even die. And here I'm asking if does anybody do anything about this, or how do people see this? Do people accept it? And so forth. And he just said, leave it alone. You don't want to get involved in that. Fast forward, we go to the festival. I'm exhausted. All day of field work, this experience, emotionally, physically tired. It's 3:00 in the morning, and I am just so tired. I ask if we can go back if it's okay if we go back to his property so we can go to sleep. He was a bit disappointed that we did not last all night. These festivals sometimes last all night until the following day. And so he took us back. He lent us his main house, and we slept in hammocks, and he moved on to his other little house where he does most of his work. In this night, I was so exhausted, and we're in the hammocks, and all of a sudden, we hear things move, and my husband says, "Did you hear that?" I said, "I heard it, but I don't know if it's a rodent or like one of the chickens outside. I don't care. I'm so tired." And he got up and he turned on the lights as we heard something move again inside the house. And when he left the lights on, he said, we're just sleeping with the lights on. So I said, okay, fine. I put like kind of paper in my ears, and just in case if there's any bugs or anything. And I fell asleep when all of a sudden my hammock, I feel something pulling on it very strongly, to the point where it sat me up. That's how strong it was. And when it sat me up, I do this, and I find a huge ant in my hair, and I take it out. And when I look up at my hammock is being covered in, we see this black kind of cloud of ants coming towards me. And so I jump up, and then I'm looking around me, and around the wall is covered in black. These ants are covering the whole entire wall and are moving, covering the whole place. And you can imagine my reaction. My husband gets up and grab a broom, and the floor is being covered. I mean, this thing is just covering, the whole thing is being covered in black, and with black ants, like these massive ants. We open up the doors, the chickens are running around, the whole floor looks like it's moving, it's just being covered. And here I am thinking, I did something, maybe this is ill will, this is not good, and please go call Don Hermes. And my husband, had to almost jump the exit to the door. Remember I talked about Mayan houses, that they have two doors facing the east and west. And so he jumps out, and he goes and calls Don Hermes, and him and his son come in, and they come in with newspapers, they light it on fire, and they start combing out the place. And here I am, just shaken by this experience. And I'm asking Don Hermes, is this sorcery? Is somebody doing something to it? And he says, no, this means it's going to rain. When it's going to rain, the ants come out to gather their food. and that means that a big storm is coming. And then I asked him, well, it just taken from that. You're saying, but things were moving, and what pulled my hammock? And that's when he said, the alush woke you up. If the alush would not have woken you up, you would have gotten bitten. You would have gotten covered in these ants, and they bite. That's why the chickens are running around. They bring everything out, and they will cover everything. And that's when it sunk in, everything just kind of, being out there in nature, being out there at the edge of, at this point, it was the edge of the community. By now, there's many houses and development there from the same community. But we were pretty much out at the end of the community, still very much in nature. And the way they interpret everything, and the way he saw the alush as being an assistant, as being there to warn us, to wake me up. He said, the alush, I had told him to take care of you and to protect you, so he woke you up. It was the alush that was moving things around for you to wake up. Okay? All right, so I'm going to stop there after this story of the alush. And we will pick up with we will finish up another example of animated spirit, of animated objects that are very much alive and active among my communities in the Yucatan and also in Guatemala. And then we're going to go into adorcism, which means calling upon the spirit to take possession of the body. And this is calling upon the spirit with permission to take possession of the body. All right, so I'll stop there. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thank you.